Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. You are listening to a rebroadcast of a previously recorded show.
Casey Belcher. I've been working here on and off with Neil for the past 3 years, and Lisa.
All right, Casey. So who is our first guest once we're ready to connect? That's the way we're going through this today. Tell me who our first guest is.
Umrigar? Thrity Umrigar?
Who are we going to have on first?
Umrigar?
Umrigar. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. So fantastic. So go ahead and we'll connect her. You can introduce her, and that's the best way we can go. Jump right into it, and we get started from there. Okay?
Okay.
Hello. Welcome live to the Miami Book Fair. How are you? We're broadcasting live, and I'm sure you see how much every year that you've attended the book fair. It's so much fun, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Glad to be back this year.
And getting to connect with different people and different things, it's just it's always an honor and privilege to get those opportunities, and that's what's so fun about it, and to connect with your fans that have read your books and get to have conversations with them. Isn't that nice?
Yes, it's always a great feeling to be back, to a venue, especially a venue as wonderful as this one. Even the people who work here begin to feel like family after a while.
Oh, they definitely, and every year it seems like certain people I get to interview, or they have another book out, and they're always cranking out something for sure, and that's what is really nice about it. So your latest novel, The Story Hour,
right.
Tell us a little bit about that, and we'll go in. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so The Story Hour it's essentially the story of this very improbable and unlikely friendship that springs up between two women from very, very different walks of life. There are two main protagonists. One is Lakshmi, an immigrant, a recent immigrant really from India. Lakshmi is in the U.S. because she's in an arranged marriage to a man who is a U.S. citizen. I mean, he's Indian in origin, but he lives here. And she's not in a very happy place or in a happy marriage. She's very isolated. Her English is not terribly good. She comes from a rural peasant background in India. And when the novel opens, Lakshmi has attempted to take her own life. And because of that, she comes in contact with Maggie, who's an African-American therapist. And Maggie quickly realizes that, what someone like Lakshmi needs is not so much conventional therapy, so much as two things. I mean, one is friendship, just to end her isolation in her new home, and two, economic independence. And so the book becomes a sort of story of Lakshmi's journey toward finding her own voice. And in the course of the development of their friendship, they each face obstacles and betrayals and cultural misunderstandings, given that their education levels, their income levels, they're just from such different walks of life, both of them.
Yeah, that's the interesting part of all this is the different walks of life, and how people, when you deal with specifically an arranged marriage and you don't have control of your life. And that's
right.
the process, the story you're telling, that people in other countries that do not have the freedoms or different cultures where they feel like they have to find their voice, correct?
Yeah, well, actually, in this book, it's almost the opposite, in that Lakshmi really has a lot of agency and freedom when she's in India. I mean, she is a very active and, vibrant member of her small little community over there. It's after she moves here that she really experiences isolation, because, she's removed from the community that had nurtured her throughout her life. But the novel also very much is about the power of storytelling, because throughout the book, Maggie draws out stories of Lakshmi's past from her. And, it is my core belief that we sort of heal ourselves and transform ourselves by the act of storytelling. So the book is very much a kind of homage, if you will, to the power of storytelling and how that can transform lives.
Yeah, and storytelling brings that whole process out in a lot of ways where we all tell stories, and through stories we learn about others. And
exactly. And ourselves, for that matter.
Yeah. I mean, I think about this all the time. The most interesting people that I'm sure you've spoken with as a journalist and different things are the people that are storytellers, that kind of are able to bring out some sort of story. And as a journalist, I'm sure it's hard as myself as a radio and TV journalist to get to crack that core, to crack that person so that they finally open up to us, because that's what's interesting about life, is their story.
Yeah, and that's exactly, and you kind of took the words out of my mouth, because that's, in a sense, what happens in the course of the novel. Initially, Lakshmi just tells sort of stories that are meaningful to her, but ultimately superficial, just about daily life. And then halfway through the book, she reveals a very deep, dark secret, which basically upends not just the novel, but also what Maggie thought she knew of Lakshmi. So suddenly this woman who seems like this shy, insecure immigrant transforms into somebody who's quite powerful and has done something that really profoundly shocks Maggie. And then the two women have to renegotiate their entire friendship and their entire relationship based on this new information. So you're absolutely right. I mean, you always try and get, as writers, as people in the media or in literature, you always want to get past the superficial stories to where a person actually lives.
Not just their talking points, because that's boring for people. Once you can open up and get that and find out that human aspect of the person, then comes the process. And so what I'm interesting about the main character, when you talk about coming from India where she felt at home and not as much in the United States, do you feel the situation is basically a culture shock, or do you think it's just not having that niche community that's in India of parents, grandparents, cousins?
For her, it very much is that. I mean, her only point of reference, the only person she really knows in America is her husband, who's not very nice to her, unfortunately. But the other thing is, I think Lakshmi's lack of education and consequently her poor language skills really impede her integration into sort of the larger American culture also. That's quite different than, for instance, my journey to America 30 years ago. I mean, I came to go to grad school. I was already, my entire education in India was in English, so I was very fluent. And, when you're in grad school, it's a whole different thing because you're arriving into the arms of community, in a sense. The college campus itself is a kind of community. So I had a very happy journey to America, and, thank God it's continued to be true. I've said this before, that in some paradoxical way, I could identify with Maggie much more than I could with Lakshmi, which might seem counterintuitive, but really Lakshmi's entire life, growing up, I grew up in a major city. She grew up in the countryside. I had a good education. She did not. I came from a middle-class family. She came from poverty. Just in terms of those points of reference, I had a whole lot more in common with Maggie than I did with Lakshmi.
And that's interesting. And so that Maggie was able to adapt to changes in her environment because of the income level. So give us an example of people who immigrate that have money compared to people that don't have money. Looking at the conversations we're having right now about people coming to the United States, immigrants, and how. I think it's interesting.
It's interesting. I mean, the angst that we've all been suffering over the issue of Syrian refugees since the attacks on Paris last week. In some ways, they might be a little misguided because what I think most people don't realize is that the people who are fleeing Syria might have been their elite class. I mean, not all of them, certainly. I'm not talking about, the 1%ers, but these are people who have education, who, might have owned small businesses of their own that have now been destroyed because of the Civil War. I mean, to put this very, very bluntly, it's not as if we took them in, we would be getting sort of the riffraff of any society. I mean, these were solidly middle-class people with middle-class lives, much like our own, whose entire lives got upended through no fault of theirs, And I think what we are seeing now, when you see people with backpacks and their entire worldly possessions are on their backs and, they're wading through river streams or whatever and coming here, they look impoverished. They look, give me your tired, give me your wretched. But that's just because we are seeing them at their worst.
Yes.
And so their entire humanity, their full humanity, their entire lives are being reduced to, a screenshot on CNN. And I think it would behoove us to keep that in mind, that these are people, as the cliche goes, not all that far removed from ourselves.
Oh, definitely. And I think that the thing that we have to understand, and as a Catholic and what the Holy Father, the Pope, has called for, that we have to have the openness for people to come and open arms, is understand specifically enough. We need to check and see and come up with some way to understand their backgrounds, research them, find out certain situations. But it's very, very easy. I think it's just going into a political situation where they're using this as a political way of an argument between both sides instead of looking at the human aspect of society. Are we going to open our door to somebody who is suffering? Absolutely. Exactly. That has gone through terrible things. Yeah.
The rhetoric in a week's time has become that this is a crisis for the United States. What I think it is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You want to beat ISIS, you can't just do it on the battlefield. You have to do it culturally also.
Yes.
You have to change their narrative. And their narrative is that the U.S. and other Western nations are engaged in a war against Islam. What better way to refute that than to say we are welcoming, in a genuine way, Muslim refugees, right? Because we recognize their common humanity. So it's just too bad that this is being seen as a crisis instead of what it really, truly ought to be and can be, which is an opportunity to destroy ISIS in terms of the wrong messages. We are almost confirming the biases and the rhetoric that groups like that use against the West rather than rising above it and proving them wrong. And that, to me, is just very, very sad and frustrating because I do feel like if we could recognize this as an opportunity, it would serve us better than, 1,000 drones and 1,000 bombs, really.
So the great thing that you're talking about is understanding, but again, it's rhetoric. It's the situation, what we do, both sides, both political aisles, is able to come up with their talking points regardless of what the human aspect is. And we're making decisions on political ideology compared to what is best for a certain group of people. It's they're bringing this up as not as a fear factor based on the immigration policies for the borders. By bringing this out, that they're putting a hard stance and a hard line. We all know for a fact if there's going to be terrorism in this country, the only way to stop it is basically to be on guard. Some of these other countries were not on guard. Since September 11th, we are very on guard about these things.
Yeah, and also, for instance, and this is by no means an excuse for what happened in Paris, but I would hope that, clearly the French government has sort of, they've been attacking ISIS, since the attacks happened. But it would also be a great moment for the French to sort of really take a good hard look at. I mean, I'm not French, I don't live there, but this is just from what I've read, that there's huge disparity between, native-born French people and Muslim immigrants. That the treatment of Muslim immigrants in that country has not been very good, and it may just be a good time to look at that. And again, you can only fight by military means up to a point. Then you have to look at other solutions, and rhetoric, changing the narrative, and also just good old-fashioned, like, material gains for your minorities, I think would be extremely helpful.
Well, I think that your book definitely speaks about the understanding of culture shock going from one country to the next, and I think that what we as a society have to look at is we're a global world. We're global. I mean, the way to connect to somebody in any country in the world and have a conversation and do business is unlike what it was 20 years ago. And that
right.
People are coming to our universities in the United States that are from different cultures. And to
yes.
think that the same narrative that happened in the 1920s and 40s, it has to be something different. But I think instead of bringing up, well, let's look at their culture, let's look at their religion, let's look at specifically enough their education level, let's look at if they're ready to be able to become great members of the United States society before we choose, kind of like what we did on Ellis Island compared to just saying, well, we're just going to, with no background, but not all the talking points go out there, and that's the important thing.
Right.
But I appreciate
right.
I appreciate you taking the time. Where's the best place we can find information on you and purchase your book? Is there a website for you, or where's the
yes, there is.
Yeah.
And it's just my last name, so it's www.umrigar, UMRIGAR, umrigar.com. Very easy to find.
Well, I appreciate it. You, as you know, I was having some technical difficulties before this interview, so
yes.
I've been kind of just flipping and forwarding. But I liked our conversation, and I think it's a good conversation for us to all to have, because we got
Thank
as
you
a
so
society.
much.
You're welcome. Take care now, and just hand it over to Casey.
Okay.
Now. Okay. All right. Back to you.
Okay.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own and shall not be construed in any way as advice from Life Improvement Radio. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our website. Personal perspectives expressed by the producers, writers, or editors will always be presented as such. Any rebroadcast or retransmission without the expressed written consent of Life Improvement Radio is strictly prohibited. Thanks for listening.